So hi everybody, thanks for joining the Common Bond Zoe Rogers Speaker Series event for this quarter. I'm really excited about this event. The timing is absolutely perfect for a big event we have coming up in the next couple of weeks. So I believe most of you are familiar with Common Bonds, but just to remind you, we are a not-for-profit organization that started in 2020. Our mission is to educate individuals and educate people on what drives racism and bias against African Americans and actions that we can all take to drive greater equity in our society. And over the course of the last few years, we've balanced education with actions and activities and supporting organizations that share our mission in driving equity and providing them with financial assistance or volunteerism. So welcome to our great session tonight. Tonight, I'm really pleased to have us talk about a topic that, as I mentioned earlier, is really important at this time of in our society. It's navigating the noise, empowering voters with media literacy in the age of misinformation. We know we have an election coming up, and thought it was great timing for us to share some ways that folks who are looking to vote, and hopefully everybody's going to vote, can go and find information that's factual. We can talk about the media and where we can find trustworthy sources in the media. And we're also going to touch on a really important topic, which is state and local elections. We know the national election is the one that has the biggest amount of visibility, but in many cases, state and local elections are the ones that impact our day-to-day lives just as much, if not more. So before I introduce our speakers, just a couple of administrative things. If you can keep your videos off, most of you do, so thank you. And also keep your videos on mute as well. We are recording this, and in the next day or so, it'll show up on our YouTube channel. So we'll let you know when it's on there, and you can certainly listen to it, watch it again, as well as share it with others. And then we do have questions and answers. If you're familiar with Zoom, if you go on the chat icon on the bottom of your screen, you'll see, you'll go on that and you can ask questions through the chat, and then we'll get your questions answered. I'm going to type in right now chat questions here, so you'll be able to see it, and we'll be able to answer your questions accordingly as you ask them. So please ask questions as we go along, and we'll get to them. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panel. First is Pat Maday. So Pat, welcome. Pat's a vice president at Magid Associates, a consumer resource and consulting company, and leader of the Magid Institute. Pat has been with Magid since 2005 after 16 years in broadcasting. He has a breadth of experience in broadcasting, from everything from the assignment desk to producing daily news reports, newscasts, documentaries, and investigations. He earned his management stripes at the Cox-owned NBC affiliate in Pittsburgh, where he was executive producer and assistant news director before becoming the news director in January of 2002, excuse me. And before that, Pat rose through the ranks in his hometown at WDIV-TV, a station in Detroit. He's won several awards for his work and is a graduate of the University of Michigan. So Pat, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Next is Deepak Puri. Deepak is an engineer and Silicon Valley executive with over 18 years of experience at Oracle, Netscape, and VMware. He co-founded Democracy Labs after the 2016 presidential election, with the mission to apply innovative technology and storytelling to progressive, social justice, and voting rights causes. Dem Labs is a nonprofit and shares details on free and affordable solutions. Candidates and advocacy groups can have a bigger impact faster with less money by using apps that are widely used in the business sector. Deepak publishes a daily blog with over 2,000 case studies at www.thedemlabs.org on topics ranging from geo-targeting, canvassing, video creation, list building, fundraising, relational organizing, AI, and mapping. So Deepak, thanks for all of your great information you helped share for us before the meeting, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mike.
And last, but certainly not least, if you are a frequent Common Bonds participant, you will recognize our moderator. We for these big discussions, we bring in the big guns. So Mark Hayes is here. Many of you know Mark is an award-winning communications expert. And prior to launching his communications firm, he spent nearly 3 decades bringing news viewers in major cities across the country their news and information of the day. And some of his stops include Dallas, Denver, Detroit, and Baltimore, with his proudest accomplishment and his greatest tenure being in Atlanta, on the Good Day Atlanta show, where we saw him every morning. He's a TEDx speaker, a Silver Telly winner, and after 2 Emmy nominations and highly coveted national recognition for spot news coverage from the National Press Photographers Association. He also launched Varsity Connects, which we've made you guys very aware of. It's a wonderful organization, helps parents go from stuck and frustrated with their communication with their student athletes to confident, well-connected parents so they can enjoy their child's athletic pursuits as a family and watch them grow and develop into mature young adults. Mark is a graduate of Howard University. In
Thank you.
we won't say the year.
Yeah, please don't.
but Mark, as I said, he's also a Common Bonds board member and has been a wonderful, wonderful advocate for us and a wonderful moderator of these events. So without further ado, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you. And as I mentioned, everybody, please, if you have questions, go on to the chat and we'll make sure we get as many of those questions answered as possible as we're going along. So Mark, over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. What a pleasure to see everyone here this evening. I expect a robust and informative conversation with our amazing panelists. So let's get right into it. In the age of disinformation and misinformation on the airways and the internet, it seems to be flooded with stories that sound so preposterous you wonder how anybody can believe this stuff, but they do. So we're here to help you navigate the noise and figure out just how to separate fact from fiction online and in the broadcast media. We have our 2 amazing panelists, and we just want to help you remain a part of the informed electorate. As many have said, this is the most important election of our lifetime. So I want to begin with our news executive, Pat, and let's begin with when misinformation and rumor, innuendo, and scuttlebutt become life or death, as we saw in North Carolina. The city of Asheville was devastated by the recent hurricane there. And there was a son-in-law who called into an XM radio show who was just frustrated that his father-in-law wouldn't accept anything from FEMA, any assistance from FEMA, because he heard that if you took assistance, they would take your home. So, Pat, this spread really, really quickly. It was even reported on some of the national broadcasts. How does it spread so quickly? And why do people take what they hear either in the streets or online as the gospel and then operate from there instead of trying to get the knowledge first? I know you deal with this a lot in the broadcast industry.
Well, to a certain extent, and it's really a great opening question, right? To better understand misinformation, I think you got to understand how information permeates society. If you think about when my firm conducts its research and we look at what are the sources that people use for news, word of mouth, particularly from friends and family, is often at the top of the list and has for largely centuries. That's just a reality of it. We live in an age now where word of mouth technology is such that word of mouth can travel beyond the town square, where in the 1700s, it didn't make it much further than that, right? But now it can go around the world in a matter of seconds. So in essence, that's why it's one of the technology is a great thing, and with any great thing, it has its downsides, and one of them is that misinformation can spread so rapidly because the technology makes it possible.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Pat. And I know your firm specializes in research. You do a lot of research for the broadcast companies and help them figure out the best strategies in order to become very competitive and very profitable in their markets. And we'll come back and talk more about that in just a moment. But first, I want to get to Deepak and talk a little bit about our young people and the internet, that information ecosystem that has really had some devastating effects on them when you look at some of the platforms, and Snapchat and Instagram, of course, we know has caused young ladies to have body image issues and such. So how do we, as parents and adults and as rational human beings, help our children understand how to separate fact from fiction? Because that's a conversation a lot of folks are having right now. When I talk to parents, they're really dealing with a lot of stuff their kids are seeing online because they're spending so much time online and getting almost all their news there. Oh, you're muted, Deepak.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Sure. So one of the things to keep in mind, these online platforms, is to consider what their motivation is. And that is primarily as a platform to serve ads. So whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on. So the fact that young people are on those platforms, the motivation of these platforms is to keep them engaged. And by providing information, or information, misinformation, disinformation, the number one goal is to say, stick around, stick on the platform, I can serve you more ads. And misinformation is probably one of the best ways to get people agitated, but they stick to the platform. And that's just the nature of the business. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And often what will happen is the misinformation is disguised around a kernel of truth. Because what I've studied is in the moment of uncertainty, like I'll give you one specific example, which was, some of you may have heard, like there was a football game and one of the players all of a sudden had a cardiac arrest and he collapsed on the field. He had to be carried off. It was a year or so ago. But within 10 minutes, news was spreading online that this person had collapsed because he had the COVID vaccination done. And it spread like wildfire. And so the bad actors take advantage of an opportunity whenever there's a void to kind of feed their own message in there. So we'll get more into it, but that's an example of how it spreads and why it's done.
Right. Deepak, I think you touched on a very important word that I think some of us overlook when we're trying to sort this whole phenomenon out. And that is the business of these platforms. And someone once said to me, if you get a product for free, you are the product, right? So our information, keeping us online, understanding who we are and the things we like, and then funneling us more of the information we like and enjoy is the business model. That's how these platforms make money. And that is the bottom line, is it not?
Exactly. So because the fact that Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, it's all around engagement and keeping it on their platform. And there's nothing better than to build the sense of outrage than to keep it online. Because if they were providing us good, useful, practical information, you would take that information and move on to the next topic. But that's not what they want to do. They want to grab you by the collar and keep you there. And the outrage is designed specifically around how could FEMA do this to people, take advantage of their houses. So they take an element of truth and they manipulate it into outrage. And the one thing which we should all be aware of is when someone is outraged by design, they are not thinking rationally. So if there's some statement out there which is designed to inflame you, get you agitated, all of a sudden, the rest of your brain, which thinks rationally, goes into park. So that's how this thing works.
Right. Let's stay with that theme, if you will. Pat, let's talk about rational behavior and rational viewers. I mean, I'm going to point to the 2016 election. as a time when all rational thought went out the window. I remember as a news anchor in Cincinnati, we started broadcasting live political rallies at dinner time, and we'd get a ton of calls about people saying, why are you playing this during, our mealtime? We're sitting down as a family. We don't want to see this. But all the stations in the market were running the political rallies because it was the train wreck you couldn't look away from. So when does it, and then we had the fake news, which came out of all that. So we basically set ourselves up to be insulted and then tried to win our customers back. And so when do we get to the responsibility of the broadcast entity, the news outlets themselves? How much responsibility do we bear for letting this phenomena permeate our broadcasts?
Right. Well, to pick up on Deepak's point, right? It's all a business. The reality is that any of the providers of information on any platform, they're nearly all of them are a for-profit business. So we as consumers of information, we as individual voters who are looking to try to make an informed decision have to first understand what the nature of the source is. So I would start with, okay, first look at platform. Okay, some platforms, what audience research tells us that some platforms are more trusted than others for information. It won't surprise anybody here that social media is at the bottom of the list. And perhaps with good reason. Okay. So first up is to understand, okay, what platform am I on? And what is the, if the business model is to just keep me glued, okay, well, then I might be at risk for information that is designed to just keep me there. Okay. TV, for instance, as a platform, has a similar business model, if you will, in that it's, a TV station needs viewers to be able to sell its advertising. But it isn't as dependent on every single click that maybe a social media platform is dependent on, right? But within each platform, and I think this is really where the hard work to become an informed voter really begins, is within an individual platform, is understanding the source of the information. Okay. Is there reliable, vetted, factually correct information on social media? Absolutely, from some sources. But you've got to understand, you can't just look at the post. You got to look at where the post is coming from. Okay. It's what has made it so difficult on social media is the creation of all these fake accounts. It doesn't matter if we think they were made by Russians or not, right? So many, we can all create 10 different accounts right now and start shipping information out. And it could appear that we look like a reputable news organization, but we as an informed voter, I guess, are going to have to do a little bit more due diligence about what is this source that I'm using for this information? Should I, in fact, trust them? Right? We may all know a little bit more about some of the more traditional news sources that are out there, whether they be national newspapers, TV networks, cable networks, and whatnot. We've all got to understand where they're coming from as well, right? And I think that's really essential to this. It's even more difficult, and I'll wrap this answer up here relatively quickly. I think it's even more difficult when you talk about, I'm trying to get information to help me make an informed decision about some of my local races. And to find out where the school board members stand on the issues that are important to me in my school district, all right, you got to, okay, again, think about the platform. Are you likely to find that on social media? Maybe. You're more likely to find that from a more traditional platform, TV, radio, or newspaper. And then you've got to go looking at the source. What is find that local source that, and then check, and then start to vet for yourself, well, how credible are they?
Right, right. So this question is for both of you, and Pat, I'll let you start. But are there any suggested sources that the panelists believe are more trusted, unbiased sources than others? And I know people like to get a variety of different news sources into their morning lineup to start the day. And I think it's easier when it comes to business news, but we're seeing, the same issues there. I mean, people can't even agree on how well the economy is doing, but numbers don't lie. So let's talk about some sources that you rely on and you think can be trusted.
Okay, so if I'm gonna make a decision about national politics, let's say, I'm gonna focus on some of the traditional national sources that I know have a large news gathering staff of highly experienced journalists. Okay. And so that's going to be a couple of the national newspapers. It's going to be a couple of the national TV news networks. Okay. It could even be because the large news gathering staff and the experienced journalists would be the case of the cable news networks as well. But then you got to understand just a little bit deeper. Okay, now what else do we know about these sources? Okay, well, certainly a large portion of cable news is designed to be opinion related. We got to know that going in, right? You shouldn't be surprised that you're hearing a specific perspective on a cable news channel necessarily, right? Especially when you're watching, let's say, in prime time. So I look to that and say, I'm looking at, and maybe this is easier for me because I know the business so well, but I'm looking, do they have a large staff? Which means they're going to be able to get more in depth. Do they have an experienced staff, right? And with journalists who have covered these issues for some time. Then you go down to the local level and you consider that as well, right? If I'm in a large market like, say, Philadelphia or Atlanta or Portland, Oregon, where I am right now, actually, the local newspaper and the local TV stations and even one of the local radio stations have, likely have a larger staff that can dig into this stuff. They tend to have more experience than an organization in, say, a smaller market. So Eugene, Oregon, for instance, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and Augusta, Georgia, right? Those local news sources are going to have smaller staffs. They tend to be less experienced. And so you've just got to look, you've got to know that going in, I guess, that when we say, I guess, consider the source is a bit of a cliche, but I think that applies in this case.
Absolutely. Deepak, how do we find those trusted sources, those unbiased sources online?
So I'll share my experience. Like some of the sources which I would weight higher than others are, number one, starting off with agencies like federal agencies like the FDA, CDC. Then I'll also consider public, PBS, KQED, and believe it or not, the BBC. I'll kind of rely on those because, like Pat said, I'm considering a couple of things. Number one, who is the source? What is the platform? Who owns the platform? And do they have an agenda? So, for instance, especially a lot of local TV stations have been bought up by this outfit called Sinclair, which is owned by an individual, and all these local channels, although they appear independent, are fed from a single source. So the moment a media outlet is owned by a particular billionaire, say, I would then kind of use a grain of salt, maybe a big grain of salt, to say, all right, what am I being fed and who is behind this? So that's one criteria, and I listed a few sources. I think public broadcasting is a great resource. The other thing I would kind of point out is there's also a difference, even in the trusted sources. There's a difference between the headline of an article and the actual content. And even some very reputable publications like the New York Times, a lot of people will just read the headline and not bother to read the rest of the content. So be very careful of that, because as I've learned, there are two different editors, one who produces the headline, which could be totally in contrast with what's underneath. The other thing I was going to emphasize is there's a big difference between broadcast TV and the online platforms, because the moment they're regulated by different agencies. So if something malicious or false is being shared on broadcast TV, they can be held liable, as we know in the case of Dominion Voting and Fox News. So there was a huge multi-million-dollar settlement. But the online platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and so on have a kind of a blank check called Section 230, which is their argument is, hey, we're not a news source, we just provide the information. So don't hold us responsible for anything that's put out there. So just as a general rule, because there's no liability for them to push out misinformation, I would kind of rate them lower, like Pat said, than regular TV and print journalists. And the final point I'd make is when something breaks all of a sudden, the journalists have to take time to research the facts, get everything organized before they make a prediction. But the bad actors can rush in and quickly start spreading conspiracy theories, like the poor guy who had the heart attack on the football field. So before credentialed journalists can get the facts, they're very judicious and cautious before they make a pronouncement. But these folks a lot of the folks on social media have no such compunction. And as a result, they'll flood it with misinformation before the journalists can come back and kind of correct the facts.
That's a great point, Deepak, because I remember around 2006, 7, 8, when social media first took off, it made our jobs very difficult because you could put anything on Twitter and we couldn't keep up with it as a news gathering organization, but we were trying to, right? And there became the competition and a race that we knew we were never going to win because they weren't restrained like we were. So we were playing by different rules. So Pat, at what point does a news organization have to say, you know what, we really do need to fact check what's happening out there in our community? For example, in the Columbus market, I believe is where Springfield, Ohio is located. And we had the story circulating about the people there that were eating the pets. And, so at what point does a news organization say, hey, we're community servants as well? I had some managers throughout my career that looked at us as community servants. But is it a good business decision to fact check? Or do you just follow the story and see where it takes you? I would I would argue the latter is a little irresponsible, but tell me what the prevailing wisdom is in the industry now.
I think you're starting to see that. I think news organizations are fact checking at the local and the national level are fact checking over the last 8 years or so more than they ever have. And that's in part, I think, because while it's the case, while it's the case that, look, politicians, you can call it spin, you can call it the omission of facts, you can call it outright lying. There's misinformation coming from politicians of all stripes all the time. But that has accelerated. Then it was given an official name, fake news. And I think you saw a push to start fact checking a whole lot more, if for only one reason, which is to say, no, it wasn't us that made this up. But what we know through doing research of local news consumers in particular, is that fact checking is actually good business sense for these news organizations. If you check the facts and it's clear to the audience that you're fact checking, the audience trusts you more. Okay. And as a result, you can, you use that source more. So again, as you're looking for sources, I would look for one that has a robust effort to fact check out there. Mark, I can think of one television station, WXIA in Atlanta, where you are, that is more preoccupied with fact checking than arguably the other stations in the local TV space in that market. Okay. So that's a big piece of this. It is good business sense.
Okay, good. We have a great question here from one of our co-founders, April Adams. And April asks, do you think people follow and rely on platforms that feed their personalities or the way they think and process? For example, people who are led by emotions tend to stay with information that feed those emotions. However, people who are fact-based and logical tend to stay with logical, fact-based platforms. Is this true? And Deepak, you had a great answer. Why don't you expand on that answer for the audience?
So people generally tend to believe stuff which reinforces their current belief system. It's just like, some people will listen to Fox, some people will listen to MSNBC, some listen to Twitter. So we all have information sources we prefer. Now, one really devious thing about misinformation and fact checking goes like this. In a situation where there's uncertainty, where what's going to happen if I get the COVID vaccination, or is FEMA going to give me relief or not? There is uncertainty involved, and people crave an answer. That's just human nature. And the unfortunate thing is, once someone starts a disinformation thread, oh my God, if you get COVID, Bill Gates is going to install a chip in your brain. Or, if you take this the Haitians are eating pets. The moment a disinformation thread starts and people come along and do the credibility check or the validation, fighting disinformation by denying it actually is not effective. And I'll tell you why, which is, if someone says, oh, FEMA is not going to take your house because that's not how they work in case you get relief, and 10 people come out and say, that is nonsense, they're not taking your house, this guy is a clown. What's happening is people listen to the word FEMA, house, takeover, this and that, and you're feeding the same narrative, even though you're denying it. And what experts have said is it takes almost 10 times as much effort and cost to put down a rumor as it does to start it.
Wow.
So it's, and if you think about it, like, how many people have heard that, oh, AIDS was an epidemic started by the government to, kill off minorities? The rumor has been disproven over and over again, but people still believe it. So killing misinformation is really hard, whereas propagating it is really easy. And so fact checking only serves to a limited extent because we could all be denying it till we're blue in the face. But once it's out there, it's really hard to combat.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Deepak. Thank you for that. We have another great question from Marissa. And she talked about earlier when we talked about the difficulty of finding information about local elections, school boards, local city councils, etc. Where would you gentlemen recommend people go for that kind of information, particularly if they live in a smaller news market? And I'll let you guys handle this, but I know when I worked in smaller markets, we really tried to do the very best we can to keep our viewers informed on local races. So we focused on the local races while we let whatever affiliate we were, an ABC or an NBC affiliate, focus on the national races because we knew that we were local and all politics is local, if you will. What do you guys suggest if it's just not enough and people need more information? Where can they go to find information on their local races?
So I think I would point to a couple of sources. So I would start with the local TV station and the local newspaper. And I think when you go looking, you're going to find some gems out there. There's a little old TV station in little St. Joe, Missouri, that last cycle had half-hour interviews with each of the people running for school board in that district, where they asked them all the same questions about all the primary issues, and it was all there available for people to wade through. And I think if you go look in, I think you can find some things along the way. Then secondarily, I would look for local local sources like the League of Women Voters and other organizations like that that tend to spend time putting together that kind of stuff. Okay. Now look, there isn't a single organization out there that doesn't have at least some agenda. But generally speaking, an independent organization um, um, like the League of Women Voters, which is, I suppose, as close to independent as you can truly get, I think is going to be a good source. That's one of the places I'd go looking first, right? I'm in, I live in the Detroit area. I'm not going to find out about the Bloomfield Hills School Board election from the Detroit TV stations, and probably not much at all from the major Detroit newspapers. I might have to go down that road to get it. In a smaller market, I'm probably going to have a better shot at those, TV and newspaper sources.
Yeah.
You offered a great resource there. Ballotpedia is a really good resource.
Yeah.
And what I would look for just in general is if you're looking for balanced information, even on a local race, it does take work. But Ballotpedia, what I like about them is they will provide both sides of an argument. This candidate's doing this candidate's doing that, and they list the features or the points that they're making. And then you have a balanced perspective, and they go from congressional, state legislative, county issues, ballot measures. So I like them. And in general, if a news source is providing you both perspectives for and against, you have a better chance of getting to the truth.
Absolutely. Great stuff, Deepak. And we are compiling these resources for you, these links, and we're going to put them in one location on the Common Bonds website, and we'll probably post them along with the YouTube video as well. But that information will be forthcoming at the end of our broadcast. Mike will fill you in on the details there. We got another great question. My son is temporary. This is coming from Chill's phone. And he says, my son is temporarily living in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area and still uses his home address in Texas. how can he place his vote? Deepak, there are a lot of resources on the election process online, and he should probably go to the Secretary of State site in Texas to begin. Those are reliable sources as well, correct?
Absolutely. And while he's at it, there's also resources online at the Secretary of State's website on to check your voting status. Have you been purged? There's an excellent resource, which I'll kind of list in there. It's called Vote Riders. And what they do is they provide resources on what a voter will need in order to vote. So those are all, like you said, the Secretary of State, vote.org, Vote Riders. Those are all good resources.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And, here in Atlanta, it's been an exciting news town, especially around the elections. But again, trying to decipher fact from fiction has been really, really difficult here in what used to be a very, very red state, which is now turned purple, and some say is demographically blue. So how do we find out what it actually is happening with some of these court cases? Because we're seeing a lot, we are getting inundated and flooded with these television political ads. It's political ad season, and I know the TV stations are making a lot of money on these advertisements. But how do we discern whether or not they are fact or fiction? Pat, I know this is probably the cause of great angst for many television executives around the country.
Right. Well, one of the most important things for everybody to understand about these television ads that you're seeing, and look, I live in Michigan, so I'm in another battleground state, and every single commercial break is this one is extreme and that one is evil, and this I get it, right? The first thing you need to know is that the way the laws are written, it is extremely difficult for a television station to reject an ad, no matter what is said. The rules and the way the laws are written, these stations have no choice but to accept it. Now, are they making a lot of money right now? Yeah, absolutely. But there's a downside for them in that it turns people off to just turning on the TV and whatnot. I guess I would say to you this about political advertising. One, the reason it's almost all negative is because that works. Studies overwhelmingly show that that is highly effective form of advertising in political race of any kind. Okay. Number two is, look, the purpose of the message is to influence your behavior. It is not designed to inform you. You need to understand that, walking, right? We all got to understand what in its essence the message is about. If somebody asks me, should I use these ads to help me form my opinion? I would say no. I would say they may inform your search for information, but you can watch back-to-back ads about the same race and the two different candidates, and they can both be talking about one candidate's record on a topic, and you can be totally confused about what the facts are at the end of it, right? So you're going to have to go do your research regardless.
Yeah. Personal responsibility definitely comes into play for election information, especially when some of these referendums are so cumbersome when it comes to the wording. It's difficult to understand and get to the meat of the question. Deepak, I wanted to ask you, on the heels of the InfoWars court battle, the civil lawsuit there, and other such battles, are we going to see more people trying to hold these online broadcast influencers accountable? Because this is where a lot of people live now. You know, YouTube is huge. You know, I don't even have to fight my kids for the remote anymore when they're home, right? I mean, they're watching YouTube, they're watching these shows, they're watching these influencers, and they're basically, like you said, saying whatever they'd like to say, whatever they feel. The podcasts are huge. So, you know, are we going to see more litigation? Are we going to see regulation? What's the future look like there?
This is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth, which is even the case with Alex Jones in InfoWars, the litigation went on for years. He's the one that many of your listeners will recognize as the one who said the Sandy Hook shooting was all, a sham. And so eventually the settlement came out against him, but that took years and years. The second thing to know is this litigation can also be used in a bad way, which some of your folks will recognize is Peter Thiel was outed by a publication called Gawker. This is all public information. And to get even with them, he helped Hulk Hogan file a lawsuit, which basically drove Gawker, Gawker, out of business. So the bad guys can also use litigation to shut down the free press. And one general rule of thumb, going back to what Pat had commented on, is the moment you see an ad or the moment something's on a platform, the general rule of thumb is follow the money, because every ad you will see, by at least for most publications, have to say who paid for this ad. Second thing is, if you're on YouTube or Twitter or so on, you've got to think who owns this platform? What is their motivation? And so always keep an eye out for the money, because that, like they say, follow the money and it'll lead you to the truth. And the final thing which I'll say, which is again kind of devious, is I was reading yesterday, there's a New York Magazine publication called The Intelligencer. And the bad guys, by design, someone has created some kind of variation on that word. So even if you've been following the New York Magazine, which is a trusted publication, the bad guys have come up with a variation which resembles them and is designed to deceive. So be very careful of that. And then what'll happen is there's an army of bots which will amplify and like the comments coming from it, which just kind of makes it look more credible. So you really have to keep your wits about you. So follow the money and see if it's a legitimate source or someone masquerading as them.
Yeah, Deepak, we had a great question on the heels of that answer. We had some great conversation tonight regarding finding the best unbiased news sources and outlets. In a similar vein, what are some of the red flags or things to look out for at an article or video level to determine whether we're reading or watching a credible source?
So what I would say is, some of the technology out there, especially AI-based, it is possible to mimic someone's face, someone's voice. You'll remember in New Hampshire, there was a robocall placed, which sounded just like President Biden saying, don't bother to vote, it doesn't matter. So the level of deception is kind of extreme, and it's only going to get worse. So what I would say is, for a normal human being to kind of identify this is an AI-generated misinformation and this is the real thing, is going to get harder and harder to do. But again, going back to something which we discussed, who is providing this information? Where is the money coming from behind it? And has the news, is it coming from more than one credible source? So an immediate red flag is some organization you've never heard of is saying something really extreme. You don't know who the author is. And it's on the side, it's saying, don't get FEMA relief, get relief from Joe's garage or something. So those are, red flags to watch out for.
Okay, thank you so much, Deepak. We had another question from Matt Scott, and he said, would the League of Women Voters be a good resource for things like ballot propositions, or is there another good source for propositions? This is one area that can be very confusing, as propositions can be very misleading. Yeah, I was in the voting booth today reading a couple of those propositions, and I was like, wow, this just did not need to be worded like this. There was a much easier way to say this. Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say, well, first and foremost, I think the key to the propositions is that you've made your decision on yes or no before you walk in the door.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to figure it out as you're reading it,
Yeah.
they're purposely designed to be difficult to understand, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, I would say the League of Women Voters. I'd apply the same thinking as I gave earlier to the sort of the local school board, right? That those local news sources, the newspaper and broadcast TV sources, and then the League of Women Voters would be good places to go for propositions as well. And in fact, in some level, since most propositions are at least most are at the state level. There are some that are at the county and the hyper local level, if you will, but a lot of them are important propositions, controversial propositions, complicated propositions are at the state level. And generally speaking, a local news source like I've described, the TV station or the newspaper, whether it's a large market or small market, they're actually going to be more interested in covering the proposition than they are in some of the city and county races for various positions.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Another good question. We're seeing this one in real time. And Chill asks, isn't Elon Musk's offer of $1 million a day for votes illegal? I mean, we're seeing legal scholars opine on this. I know this has got to be a difficult story for journalists to be covering at this time because election law is so very difficult to put into people speak. Pat, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality is that these laws are all incredibly complicated. And so, it probably, I don't know if it's illegal or not. Um, but I guess what I know for certain is it's stuff like this that pops out at you that I think is you're trying to become an informed voter. You gotta make a decision. Are you going to ignore the noise? Are you going to ignore some of the noise, right? Like I try to ignore some of the noise and just focus on what are the issues that are important to me. Now let's figure out where do the candidates stand on them, and let me make my decision and try to ignore some of that noise.
Awesome. And then we have Fanal with the question or a statement here that says the other news sources when it comes directly from the candidate's mouth. Yes, indeed. People discount outrageous things they say. So should we believe them when they say things like they will enact the Alien Enemies Act? We've heard that recently, and other crazy things like arresting the enemies within. What should we do with that? Deepak, this is where we've got to decide on how much we value our sanity, because there is just so much of this stuff out there. And if you look for it, you will find it.
Yeah, like I would say some of the candidates are spreading like a lot of noise to distract people, because something which Pat said, which is if you start with the premise, what is, as a rational thinker, what's important to me? Healthcare, environment, gun violence, so on and so forth, tax policies, my kids' education. Start there. And like you said, we all want to preserve our sanity. And if you say, well, there's going to be so many red herrings out there, intentionally thrown out there to kind of distract you from what really matters. Is he going to arrest people? Is he going to, hang Mike Pence, or so on and so forth, or all kinds of nonsense? The nonsense isn't necessarily to persuade you that he's going to do it or not do it, but the intention is to distract you from focusing on what matters. And that's a really tough challenge, because these red herrings are designed to be outrageous and get you fired up. But the more, it requires a little bit of discipline, like you said. Ignore some of this chaff and focus on what matters, and go to trusted sources who aren't doing it for the money. And someone had posted a comment about Elon Musk. So the thing is, going back to the same theme, follow the money. Why is a billionaire spending millions of dollars propping up Trump? He's not a fool. He's making this investment of money to get something out of it. And is his agenda the same as yours? So the money is a good filter on why the people are doing what they're doing. And then if you can filter out some of that noise, you can then focus on what matters.
All right, Deepak.
Mark,
and-
Mark, if I could, let me just say one more thing.
Yes, sure.
That question. At some level, in terms of what's coming out of the candidate's mouth, set aside even some of the extreme things that sometimes get said or misconstrued or whatever. You could, we live in a world where we live in a soundbite world, okay? TV is loaded with short sound bites that never quite tell us exactly what was said. We don't quite get the total context of it, right? And social media, a 15-second TikTok video is going to exacerbate that issue. But, the great thing about the internet is it takes about 2 minutes to find the entire statement. You can find the entire speech, even if it went 2 hours long, and listen to it for yourself, hear the whole thing in the entire context, and then you can make a decision about it. It's one of the reasons why we all like debates, right? Because to a large extent, there's less, I should say, editing of what's coming out of the candidate's mouth in that moment.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for an amazing discussion. I really enjoyed this. I could go on all night on this topic. It's obviously very close to my heart, as I spent 30 years in the news business. Pat, great job. Deepak, a wonderful job. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to participate in this conversation this evening. Oh, my favorite bit of misinformation is that the blue team is able to create hurricanes and storms that only target Trump supporters and red states. I think that's the best one I've heard in a while. So with that, I'll send it back to you, April.
Oh, okay, my audio was on. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
What a profoundly useful and wonderful conversation we've had tonight. This has been, it's one of those things where, as an individual, a thing and you operate to my question, you operate according to your personality. Me, I'm like Mark. I don't the noise. I'll try to get to the root of what the issues are, and so I tend to follow that line of thought and outlet. But this is very helpful for us as individuals to kind of nail down exactly how to obtain credible information from credible sources. And so I want to thank you, Pat and Deepak. Thank you so much for your expertise, for your knowledge and your information, and for your willingness to share it with our audience. It is very helpful. You guys said a few things that that stuck with me, and I want to summarize it for Common Bond's audience. One, start with a premise. You ended with that. Start with a premise, and that way, what's important to you, to me, do I want the government telling me what to do with my body? Start with that, and then all the other noise, drown that out. Start with the premise. And then you also said follow the money. So important, because that's the motive. That's the motive. Follow the money. And then due diligence. Do your due diligence. Don't be lazy. We can't be lazy. We have to. This is too important to be lazy. We have to do our due diligence. We have to drill down. We have to dig, uncover. And you've given us really good resources, really good information in order to help us to do that. So I thank you guys so much. Mark, wow. This was, we can tell this is a passion of yours, and this is down your alley. You always do a tremendous job, and I want to thank you for facilitating this conversation for us. You knew what questions to ask, the follow-ups, just perfect. So thank you so much for that. And Common Bonds, I thank you always for supporting us and helping us to stay with our mission. And this conversation really does help us to stay informed, be informed and stay informed, which is part of our mission. So thank you, Common Bonds family, always for your support. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you for your love and your support for this platform and for this information. We want to be the type of platform where you can get credible information. And I think that Pat and Deepak helped us in that way. So thank you guys. Stay tuned for our next quarter speaker series. Look out for information on the platforms in your email, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great night, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. Thanks, guys.
Great job.